Now, I've seen these videos on who everyone believes is the most overrated wrestlers of all time. Today I had nothing better to do, so I figured I'd get in on the act and give you my list of the most overrated wrestlers that I have ever seen. Now, let me say that this is strictly my opinion, and I won't just say they're overrated because I didn't like them. I will actually give reasons, or try to give reasons, why I find them overrated. This is strictly my opinion and my opinion alone. And by the way, the usual suspects, such as Goldberg, Triple H, and surprise, surprise, Randy Orton, are not on this list. With that said, let's get into it. We start with John Cena. Now, I will admit that I kind of like John Cena, the person. In his interviews with the mainstream media and for his charity work, I have to give him credit on that. And he seems, at least that's the way he presents himself, he seems like a really nice guy. As a wrestler, though, I have heard that he's actually better than he shows. If he is, I haven't seen it, because he basically does the same match nearly every time unless it's a really big match. Then he might vary it up a little bit, but it's varied up for him, like the 5-knuckle shuffle from the top rope. I mean, for him, that's varying it up, but really, that's not that impressive. I mean, the King Jerry Lawler in his heyday used to do a fist drop from the top rope, and he actually did it better. But back to John Cena. There's people that think, oh, he's the best ever. Well, to me, that's ludicrous. He's not the best wrestler ever. He's not even the biggest name ever. I mean, that would go between Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, and you could argue Stone Cold Steve Austin. But so many fans, who I suspect has been watching wrestling for the last 5 years or less, thinks he's the ultimate in the business. How? Now, he does make money for WWE. I will give him that. But part of that is WWE knows how to market. And they market Cena very well. I mean, look at their competitor TNA. They got names like Jeff Hardy, the Immortal Hulk Hogan, Sting, and several other known guys. But they barely make it out of the 1.0s in the ratings and in merchandising because they don't know how to market them or even their homegrown talent. Back to Cena again. I have nothing against the guy personally, but he's not the best of all time. Not at this point. And he's highly overrated, but he's not the worst. Not by a long shot. Now to number 9, Jeff Hardy. I won't spend much time on him other than to say that his good points is that he has name value, and can draw when properly used. But in the ring, he is just decent at best. His claim to fame is basically the guy that is crazy as shit and jumps off of nearly anything. The only one that's worse than him for this is New Jack. New Jack isn't on my list, by the way, but if he was, he'd rank higher than Jeff Hardy, because at least Hardy, as I said, can wrestle just a little bit. I could be wrong on this, but I don't think I've ever seen New Jack do anything aside from using a weapon or a trash can or a staple gun or whatever the hell he does. Back to Jeff. He gets hyped for his willingness to do crazy stunts. Ric Flair once called Mick Foley a glorified stuntman. But if anyone fits that bill, it is Jeff Hardy. Just as much as Foley, if not more. But he's not the worst either. Moving on to number 8, Jeff Jarrett. Now, may I say that Jeff Jarrett is a veteran and knows a lot about the wrestling business, being that he was virtually raised in it, being the promoter's son, the son of Jerry Jarrett. And He's okay in the ring. But his claim to fame has been, number one, creating TNA, which he wanted to create a new product. I give him props for that. But I kind of suspect he also did it because he has so much heat with so many other people in the wrestling industry, particularly with WWE, that no way he could ever go back there. And number two, ripping off gimmicks. I mean, everybody bites from somebody, but I've never seen I've seen very few guys that was ever so blatant about it. That strut he does is a basic ripoff of the Ric Flair strut, who in turn ripped it off from the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. That guitar shot, the acoustic equalizer, was basically a ripoff of the Honky Tonk Man. I've never understood, other than his relationship with Vince Russo, how Jeff Jarrett keeps getting these main event storylines when, even at his best, he was upper mid-card. I can see being a main eventer here and there, but for him to constantly be in that scene, especially in WCW and later on in TNA, when you weren't that level to begin with, is asinine. Still, I'll give him credit for this. He does possess a love for the business, in my opinion, and that's why he's on the lower end of my list. Plus, I have to give him props. Any man that can hook a number like Karen Jarrett, the former Miss Kurt Angle, has to have some game. Anyway, number 7, and this one may draw some ire from some people, but the Von Erich family. Now let me explain this one a bit. The Von Erich family were pioneers in terms of how wrestling on TV was presented. Southwest Sports, later World Class Championship Wrestling, used a lot of technology and techniques that are used today by WWE and have been used by other organizations such as TNA and in the past WCW. These type of techniques was cameras around the ring, more mics, mobile cameras to follow the action, etc. I mean, in the early days, you basically had 2 shots, wide shot, medium shot. That was it. Now, when these guys came along, they got a hold of this new equipment, and it took presenting wrestling to a whole nother level. Now, as for the Von Erichs themselves, Fritz was ahead in terms of knowing how to market, and he definitely marketed his sons as the best wrestlers on earth, even though a couple of them really weren't. Now, on that subject, the eldest males of that family were definitely the best. Fritz, from what I've seen of him, was a rugged wrestler, one of the most physical of his day. I mean, his style was basically get in there, pound you, beat the shit out of you till he got tired. I mean, basically, if you gave me a choice between facing Fritz Von Erich versus, say, the Ultimate Warrior, I'd much rather face the Ultimate Warrior. For this reason: Warrior, boom, clothesline, splash, over with. Fritz, he might just whoop your ass for about 10 minutes. 10, 15, and it'd be the longest 10, 15 minutes of your life. So, no, I'd rather just get it over with. Now, as for his sons, Kevin, David, and Kerry, they were great athletes. David, in my view, was the overall best of the bunch. I remember on the documentary called Triumph and Tragedy of World Class Championship Wrestling from WWE, Jim Ross went so far as to say he felt David was the best of the Von Erichs, including Fritz himself. While he was a good-sized man, he was like 6'6", 6'7", about 254 pounds in his prime, David didn't have the body and the good looks of Kevin or Kerry, but he knew how to work a match. He knew how to work a crowd, and he had great ring psychology, better than any of his brothers. Kevin was an early high flyer. He knew how to move around the ring and did wrestle hard. I mean, he also had a good physique and good looks, which helped as well. Kerry, in his early days, was the most striking of the brothers because he had the looks, he had the body, but he also had a lot of the in-ring ability that David Von Erich had. So he was kind of a melding of Kevin and David all at once. He had the potential to really be a big star in wrestling. If it was just those three, this family would not be on my list at all. Because those three were great, along with Father Fritz Von Erich. But when you talk about the Von Erich family as a whole, you are including Mike Von Erich and Chris Von Erich. And I know they're dead and all, but let's be honest. Those guys weren't even decent in the ring. Definitely not Mike. I mean, they sucked. Mike, from most stories, didn't even want to wrestle, but only did it to please his father. Chris, on the other hand, did want to wrestle, but his body just couldn't take the pounding, and he kept getting injured all the time. And on the elder sons, as I said earlier, David was the best in my mind. Kevin was good, but not great in my view. Even for the 1980s, there were guys that were better high flyers than Kevin. Plus, he seemed to go downhill after the death of David. I mean, he was pretty good when all three of them were flying high. You had the feud with the Freebirds. You had all, and World Class was a top territory. But after David died, it's like Kevin lost interest, and he just really began to suck. I mean, he would have good performances here and there, but he definitely wasn't what he was after David's death. Now, as for Kerry, he messed himself up with drugs, and then after the motorcycle accident in 1986, his career really went on a downward spiral. It was a slow downward spiral, but it was a downward spiral nonetheless. And he had to keep medicating himself just to get through the day, which led to his later troubles and his eventual suicide in 1993. On Mike and Chris, they had their demons, and their demons got the best of them. I won't go into too much on that. That's probably a topic for another video. Now, are the Von Erichs legendary? Yes. Did they contribute to the business? Yes. But in my view, when you take them as a whole, they are overrated in my eyes because you had other wrestling families that have left a much better wrestling legacy, such as the Hart family, the Funk family, or even the Johnson Maivia clan, which boasted Peter Maivia, Rocky Johnson, and of course Dwayne Johnson, who's better known as The Rock. But while they're the saddest story on this list, they are not the most overrated on my list. Let's go to number 6, Lex Luger. Now, let me say that Luger early in his career had potential to be great. He had the look, the body, and his matches with Ric Flair showed that he could have been a big draw. While, make no mistake, Flair made him in those battles, Luger actually used way more moves and showed he could wrestle a little bit back then. Over time, though, he relied more on his look and body and didn't really put effort into his matches. Over the years, Luger, technically a veteran of the game, was being carried by guys that he should have been helping make it to stars. But they were more advanced than he was. So in a almost a crazy reversal, they were actually carrying him. The best example of this was in 1989 when he feuded with the late Brian Pillman. Pillman looked like the veteran, while Luger, though having about 2 years of experience on Pillman and was NWA US champion to boot, looked like a rookie. And I actually saw Luger live once against Sid Vicious. As a teen, as I was at the time, I thought he was great, but looking back on it now, he definitely was not that special. He only got booked because of his, like I said, his body and his looks. Still, at the time, he was a hot commodity. And in my view, he isn't the most overrated. Now let's move on to number 5. Bob Holly. From a guy that started out as Sparkplug Holly to Hardcore Holly, I will give him credit for one thing. He is tough as hell. That being said, though, he got pushes way more than he deserved. Basically, from what I understand, he was a bit of a prick, especially to those just starting out. Plus, his biggest claim to fame was a botch when Brock Lesnar accidentally broke his neck after delivering a powerbomb wrong to him. Now, as I said earlier, Holly was a tough guy. No question, because anyone that could take that nasty powerbomb botch, and I could also remember another one like about a year or two after that, where he landed through a table wrong during a suplex spot with Rob Van Dam, where he had this nasty gash in his upper back and into his lat, and it just bled horribly. In fact, they used to use that in their promo for "Don't Try This at Home," if anyone's ever seen it. But he continued and even finished the match. So, as a wrestler, while I do think he was overrated, I have to admit he was tough as shit. But did he deserve all the pushes he got? Hell no. He wasn't that good, and I can't remember any match he carried or even helped to make 1 star. And if what I heard on his backstage attitude, especially towards rookies, is true, he gets no respect from me as a person. He says he hates rookies. Well, I'm with you there. I hate bullies. So there. Number 4. Kevin Nash. Now, Nash basically made his career on his size, charisma, and mic work. He was great on the mic. And politic ability. Granted, all the members of the clique were bad for that. Shawn Michaels was, Scott Hall was, Sean Waltman was, Triple H was. But Nash was easily the most successful politician of that group, and incidentally the worst. And what's funny is that all those guys I just named, in terms of in-ring talent, were better performers than Nash. Yes, even Sean Waltman was better than Nash. During his one WWE title reign, Nash was one of the lowest rated champions in history, if not the lowest rating champion in history, at least in the WWE. Plus, we all know the stories from WCW, particularly when he booked himself to end the streak of Goldberg at Starrcade 98. Which in my mind was one of the worst decisions ever. I'm not a huge fan of Goldberg, but that decision was very self-serving on the part of Nash, and is one of the nails in the coffin that was WCW. But the most overrated? Nah. Number 3. Dino Bravo. Yeah, I know he's an old timer from the WWF days, and I know he's deceased and all that, but I'm sorry. But even back then, when I was a kid, I thought this guy sucked. Granted, he could move despite having all that bulk, which to me slowed him down. From what I understand, though, he used to be a good technical wrestler in his younger days, but opted to go to the power game, which I couldn't understand because I looked at some of those old pictures. He already had a good build. Why? People want to give him a pass, too, because he's dead, but I understand that. You want to show the dead respect. But I'm sorry, he was not that special. Yet, he got main event programs a lot, especially in the late 80s, early 90s. I never could understand why. Granted, he could work a match with someone like Bret Hart, who had a scientific wrestling type style, which was what Bravo originally started with, so he knew that style. But put him in there with someone like Kerry Von Erich, and I mean Kerry Von Erich as the Texas Tornado. Want the example? look at WrestleMania 7, one of the undercard matches. I think it's the second match on the card. Ooh. I mean, fans would have called the Divas matches of today a piss break. Let me say this. There's your piss break right there. Anyway, I was just never that impressed with the guy. I never understood why he got all these main event programs. But, again, he's number 3. One of the most overrated? Yes. The most overrated? Nope. Here comes number 2. Sid Vicious. Much like Lex Luger, he got hyped because of his size and his look. Now, he did have a good character. I will give him that. His character was downright scary at times, but in the ring, he sucked. Yet, because of his look, he got main event programs far more than he ever deserved. I would have to say that any night, Sting, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, or even Chris Benoit had to wrestle this guy, they definitely earned their money because they made him look better than he actually ever was. Was also one of the sloppiest wrestlers I've ever seen. Do you remember 1991 in that War Games bout where he was part of the Four Horsemen? Remember that botched powerbomb to Brian Pillman? I'm amazed he didn't kill the man that night. I know I wouldn't want to get in the ring with him because I'd be scared he'd botch something and I'd end up in a wheelchair. But I will say that moments like that did do one thing for him. It helped his image in that you knew he could be dangerous. And he isn't my number 1. My number 1 coming up, drum roll. Bing! The Ultimate Warrior. Or should I say, the Ultimate Warrior. Of all the muscle guys on my list, the Von Erichs, Nash, Bravo, Vicious, Luger, this guy has to be at the top of my most overrated. Basically, without the late ravishing Rick Rude and the late Macho Man Randy Savage, this guy goes nowhere. I know Hulk Hogan put him over at WrestleMania 6, but these two had to work with him night in and night out, referring to Savage and Rude, whereas Hogan only faced off with him maybe a few times, WrestleMania 6, once at the Royal Rumble, and once in WCW. That's about 3 times. He only had to face off with him 3 times, whereas Savage and Rude had to work with him all the time. So they definitely deserve props, and why either one of them is not in the WWE Hall of Fame is beyond me, but that's another video. He had virtually no wrestling ability, almost no stamina. All he had was the look and the right gimmick. Most of his matches were short to hide his many shortcomings in the ring. And as I said, the only time this guy looked like he had ability is when he would take on either Rude or Savage. And I guess you could count Hogan in there too, but you know, that was almost the blind leading the blind. Well, I should say the blind leading the near blind. As they seem to be, but those guys seem to be the only ones that could get a good match out of them. Hell, even Warrior admits Rude and Savage really helped his career. As arrogant as he is, he even admits that. Plus, speaking of arrogance, he was so arrogant reportedly backstage that no one wanted to be around him. WWE only gave him time because of he sold a lot of merchandise and he was over with the fans, especially in the late 80s, early 90s. But in reality, they should have gave this dude the boot after his first run in WWE. But after his runs there, he didn't do too much other than that failed run in WCW. Plus, other than Rude and Savage, and I guess by default Hogan with that WrestleMania 6 match, who else did he have a classic match with? Nobody. yet people will still rank him as one of the best ever. I mean, are you kidding me? I'm sorry, but this guy has to be, at least on my list, the most overrated wrestler ever, in my opinion. Now, I know I mentioned these guys earlier. Some will actually ask, why is Goldberg or Triple H now on this list? Well, while you can make an argument for both guys being overrated, they're not on my list, and here's why. Goldberg wasn't around long enough to really be called underrated or overrated. Was he really that good in-ring wise? No. But in his defense, he didn't get the proper training that he should have, which led to him hurting a lot of people, most notably Bret Hart. And, you know, that's his fault, but that's also WCW's fault, because they were so desperate to have somebody to challenge Stone Cold. And make no mistake about it, he was there to try to challenge Austin, because Austin and WWE was kicking their tails around the time they was bringing Goldberg along. I felt they always brought Goldberg, made him a big star, but they did it too soon. They did it way too soon, in my opinion. Did he play his character well? Yes. He made you believe that he couldn't be beaten, so he did have a good character, and he did have athletic ability. And for his time, he did play his part well in WCW. And it's hard to argue that he didn't deserve to be where he was at that point. Was he overrated in some ways? Sure. But if he was on my list, he would be like in the top 20 or 25. Not in the top 10, which is what this is. Now, on to Triple H. The argument has always been that if he wasn't part of the McMahon family, he wouldn't be where he is now. Now, I'm not as big, I can't say I'm a big Triple H mark, but I have to take argument with this a little bit. Would he have been in the spotlight as long as he was? Probably not. But there's no way to know that. There's a good chance, though, he probably wouldn't have been. But remember something. He was actually in main event type programs long before his relationship with Stephanie McMahon began. And he was already putting on good matches and was already getting over with the fans long before that relationship started. So, to me, the McMahon connection would have only gotten him so far. If he didn't have the look, the body, and the skills that he does have, and that he did have and still does, it wouldn't have made any difference who his father-in-law was. Now, did he use it to his advantage? I'd say yeah, of course he did. But let's be honest, if we were in his same position, we probably would have done, most of us would have done the same thing. And let's also be honest about something else. People say, oh, if he wasn't with Stephanie McMahon, he wouldn't be nowhere. Well, just speaking as a man, let's be honest. If Stephanie McMahon wanted to give you some pussy, most of you guys that are trashing Triple H saying he wouldn't be where he is when he wasn't fucking Stephanie, most of you would have done the exact same shit. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I know I would have. I probably would have fucked her till my balls fell off. I mean, I'm not gonna lie about it. I mean, good grief. And most of you guys that are trashing, you sound like haters, because I'd say the majority of you would have done the same thing as Triple H. So, to me, that's not really a good argument. But I will say this, seriously, on a serious tip, Triple H can be argued as overrated. But at best, he's in the top 20 or maybe 25 for that type of list. He is not top 10. At least not in my opinion. Well, that's all from here. See you later.